Hi, got a new story for you. Teller ripped down the freeway on his motorcycle towards the coast. The midnight air pulled a tear from the corner of his left eye. It ran along his cheek, into his beard, and dried. The cool air numbed his bones further than the hard life that he had lived so far. The rattling of his V-twin moto always gave him the feeling that he could still feel. He chose this bike from an old motorcycle graveyard many years ago. It was mostly there, as the old man said that sold it to him. Teller bought it to bring his attention away from the mixed-up life he had chosen at the crossroads long ago. To rebuild such a machine brought him recluse from the demands that were placed on him by those that he pledged to. Slowly, each part came to him. Some of them he had to rebuild or he refurbished because buying a new part was not an option. A few parts he had made himself with bits of metal turned on a lathe or pieced together by welding. The bike became something more than a machine. When Teller was finished, he had made a companion, one that would always be there for him. A reliable piece of rust, as he always called it. The two travelers now roared on their journey to the beach. Teller always went to where the sand meets the sea when he was stuck on a problem or when he felt less than himself. He looked at the vastness of the water and the multitude of tiny sand grains, and these both outnumbered the worry that he brought to the beach. This night he was on the same mission. The tires of his friend hummed as they crossed the metal grating of the drawbridge that led them to the island. A man in the bridge tower ogled the fine motorcycle as Teller raced past him and wished that it was him riding so free from the concerns of work. Teller, however, was not free. He was carrying a heavy burden of life. The weight was not felt by his companion, for it was a fleshly burden carried only by a man's heart and conscience. They reached the end of the bridge's expanse, and the tires hummed a new song from the concrete roadway of the coastal isle. The marshlands looked like a dark abyss on both sides of the roadway, a narrow path that allowed one to pass without sinking into the mire. Teller cracked the throttle, and his companion shot into the coming light of the morn. The salty air burned Teller's lungs. They traveled on until a stop sign slowed them. Teller instinctively turned left and headed up the sandy island strand. The two travelers were alone this early hour as they passed all of the wealthy people's vacation homes that sat empty. It was early fall, and the melee of summer was now over. The island returned to its splendor of nature once again. Teller shook his head in disgust as he passed one of the biggest houses on the island. Fucking rich people would eat their own if status required it, he said bitterly. This was the only feeling he had these days, bitterness. His bike roared louder in agreement as he twisted the throttle to try to pull away from his only feeling. The lighthouse loomed in the distance, its red then green light ever changing. As Teller neared it, he made a right and headed to the sea. A familiar street that in the past always led to a moment of silent thought and relief. Teller sought this once again. This last week had him guilty of blood and betrayal. Betrayal of his own code to not betray himself. This he had done. His deed was in the dark, for it was one of darkness. The last light in Teller had shown him that he now even wanted to destroy his own honor by following orders. The road was ending and Teller pulled the clutch lever in and killed the engine to coast into the parking spot half covered by sand. He turned the key, the headlight went off, and darkness surrounded them as he kicked the jiffy stand into position. The stars were now offering their light dimly on the shore. Teller removed his helmet and placed it on the sissy bar of his ride. He swung his leg over the machine and stood looking over the sandbar at the sea. The white crests of the breaking waves sparkled in the starlight. Taylor walked toward the sands of his therapist and stopped. He turned to look at his bike one more time. "Goodbye, old friend," he said in his broken voice. The chrome gleamed back the starlight as the exhaust pipes crackled from their cooling from the night sea breeze. Taylor turned and walked onto the beach. His black boots made strange sounds as they rubbed against the sand. Taylor reached into his leather jacket and retrieved a silver flask that had worn its shape into its pocket from all the years it was there. Liquid courage, Taylor thought to himself. He downed its contents. Its burning distracted the acrid bitterness that was eating Taylor. He threw the flask into the night air and it landed quietly on the sand. He continued to walk towards the pier that lay before him. Taylor stepped up onto the boards with his boots, and his boots echoed the woody thump with each step. The pier stretched out over the sea. It was empty save for some benches placed on the sides and a few tables that were used by fishermen to clean their catch. Taylor walked to the end and looked down into the darkness of the waves below. He could feel the pulse of the earth from the waves crashing into the pier's pilings, although his own was far from his attention. Taylor sat on the hard bench as the flask's contents took effect on his senses. He looked up into the night sky as many questions flooded his mind. He sunk his head into his hands in shame. He wanted to cry, but he didn't know how to, as this was removed from him long ago from the violence that he endured as a child. This violence made him into the monster that he now saw as himself. It was an excuse to harden himself further into one capable of doing the deeds that brought him to this very moment. An image passed into his mind. A memory of a picture that he had carried with him until it was lost one night in a fit of drunkenness. It was an old picture with torn corners and whitened folds of him as a young boy smiling at a table in front of a big piece of chocolate cake. His grandmother stood behind him with a proud grin, full of hope for her grandson that had made it yet another year in this challenging world. This picture proved to Taylor that he was more than what everyone since then had told him he was. At one time he could smile, even just for having a piece of cake. The image in his mind dissipated and was replaced with the horror of what he had done to someone just a day before. Teller reached into his jacket and unbuttoned the snap of his brown leather holster. He slowly drew his revolver from next to his heart and placed it on the bench next to him. The stars gleamed in its chromed surface. Teller wondered where or when he had turned away from the smiling boy and his lost, treasured assurance. How could he be here now, feeling nothing except the worthlessness of the darkness of his life? Even the lifeless chrome of his bike and revolver reflected light. He searched himself for a reflection of any spark. He found none. Teller picked up his side piece and felt the coldness of the steel, now wet with sea spray. He pulled back the hammer and raised the pistol upwards towards his head. "What kind of fish you going to catch with that?" A question came from behind that suddenly shamed Teller for his decision to end his torment, to ease his suffering created by a lifetime of bad intent. "I say, I've never seen a fisherman without a pole on this pier, and I've been coming here for a long time." Teller turned his head to see who was talking as he laid his gun back on the bench beside him. It was an old man that hobbled along with a tall walking stick. He moved slowly and with intent. Teller wondered how this feeble man could have made it to the end of the long pier so quickly. He said nothing to the man. "It sure is nice to be able to get here just in time to see the light of day crest over the ocean horizon," the old man said assuredly. Teller looked at the horizon at the old man's prompting. A sliver of gold light appeared between the sea and the gray clouds that lay just above the distant waves. The man walked to the metal railing, and his stick struck the wooden planks, making a hollow sound that echoed throughout the pier. He looked down into the dimly lit waves that crashed far below him. The two men were silent as the creation carried on in its song. A wind blew Teller's long hair into his face as he sat waiting for the man to leave him to his reason for being here. Time was long while he waited. The silence was ticking in Teller's mind. Then the old man spoke. "I'll be 87 in about 5 minutes, he said as he looked at his watch that looked as if it had been on his wrist for 50 years at that time. "I see that fine machine you have there at the beginning of the dock. Can't say I ever had the joy of riding one myself. Always wanted to, but life had me doing things contrary. Tell me, young man, did you piece her together yourself?" The old man then leaned on his staff. "Yes, sir," Teller replied. Sir? Teller thought to himself, as he never called anyone sir in his life. "Yes, sir, a fine job, I'd say. Almost as it looked on the showroom floor, as I remember. You know, that is the exact model that I almost bought new before. What does it matter? You know, life." The old man trailed off and turned to look at the sea again. The sun was peaked halfway over the horizon. Teller sat in silence, and all his effort to restore his bike flashed through his mind. He remembered the first ride he took once he had finished it. He rode it until he tired, then laid out his bedroll next to it and slept that night alongside a country road. The revolver now reflected the golden red hue of the rising sun. Well, that does it. I'm officially an old geezer, the old man said as he turned back towards Teller. What do you say you let me have a cast with that rod and reel you got there at your side? The old man outstretched his steady hand toward Teller. Teller picked up his .45 and handed it to the old man, to his own surprise. The old man took it and studied it in the ever-increasing light of day. Without another word, he threw it into the ocean. The waves swallowed it up, and it sunk to be covered over by the shifting sands. The two shared the silence once again. Minutes later, the old man turned and started to walk back to the sands of the beach. As he stepped past Teller, he said, I must be getting back, for my granddaughter is waiting to meet me for a birthday breakfast. She has my favorite thing, chocolate cake. Imagine having cake for breakfast. It ain't healthy, but at my age, a smile is the best medicine. You take care of that old motorcycle for my sake. I'd give anything to go for at least one ride on that fine machine. The old man patted Teller on the shoulder as he passed by. Teller sat in motionless shock. The old man's walking stick echoed once again as he left. Teller thought to himself, had I just given this man my pistol that no man has ever held except me? Did I just let this old man throw my sidearm into the sea? Teller listened and no longer heard the stick hitting the boardwalk. He turned, and the man was gone. How could this feeble man have made that long trek to the sand in such a short time? Teller rose from his seat. He looked up to the sky into the light blue heavens. The stars twinkled in the remaining darkness. Teller shook off the unbelief of what just had happened. He slowly walked back to his fine machine. He felt renewed as it was all the other times he came here to seek relief from his burdens. This time, though, as he reached the sand, he had a strong desire for a big piece of chocolate cake. A new thing happened to an old Teller. A smile formed on his face as he crested the sand dune and spied his bike gleaming in the golden light of sunrise. It became evident to him that he, too, could be rebuilt into a fine machine, almost as it was first made and presented new on a showroom floor. The end.